always believed that family was the one thing you could rely on, no matter what. Growing up, I had always been close with my parents. They were my rock, until one day that rock shattered into a million pieces. I was 8 months pregnant when everything fell apart. It wasn't like I hadn't tried to be the perfect daughter. I did everything they asked of me. I worked hard, kept up with my studies, and always made sure to stay out of trouble. But despite all that, I found myself sitting in the cold, harsh light of my living room, facing a truth I couldn't believe. I was being kicked out. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when everything started to unravel. I had just come home from the doctor's office, feeling a little uneasy but mostly okay. The baby was healthy, and that's all that mattered. But when I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. My mom was sitting in the kitchen, her arms folded tightly across her chest, and my dad was pacing back and forth like he was preparing for a battle. "Mia," my mom began, her voice tight, "we need to talk." I felt my stomach churn. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could already feel the knot in my throat. "I think it's time for you to leave," she said, her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What? Leave? Why would you say that?" My dad stopped pacing and finally spoke up. "We've given you everything, Mia. You've always had everything you needed, but now, this situation, being pregnant at your age, not even married, it's too much for us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, the people who had always been there for me, were turning their backs on me just when I needed them most. I was 8 months pregnant. I could barely walk up the stairs without feeling exhausted, and they were telling me to leave? How could they do this to me? Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had worked so hard to make them proud, and now this was how they were repaying me. I could feel my face flush with anger. "I can't believe this," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I've done everything you've asked. I've tried to be the daughter you wanted, but now, when I need you the most, you're throwing me out?" My mom stood up and walked over to me, her eyes softening for a brief moment. "It's just, this isn't how we envisioned things, Maya. We didn't expect you to get pregnant like this, especially not without being married. You've disappointed us." Disappointed them? My body felt like it was on fire. How could they think this was my fault? Yes, I was pregnant. Yes, it wasn't planned, but this was still their grandchild, and I was still their daughter. How could they just walk away from me like this? I stood there, my breath coming in sharp gasps, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. I could feel my baby kick in my belly, a reminder of the new life I was carrying, life that I wasn't ready to face alone. But I had no choice. My parents had made their decision, and I had to figure out how to survive, even if it meant facing the world on my own. "I won't leave," I said, my voice low but steady. "I won't give up on my baby, and I won't let you treat me like this. You may not want me here, but I'm not going anywhere." It was clear that my parents didn't expect me to fight back. My mom looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and disappointment, but I wasn't about to let her win. I wasn't going to let anyone push me down. I would make this work, with or without their support. That night, I packed my things. There was no other choice. I couldn't stay under a roof where I wasn't wanted, especially with my pregnancy so far along. I had to do this for my baby, for my future, and for myself. I would make it work. I would find a way. I never thought I'd be in this position. 8 months pregnant, living with my parents, and then suddenly, I was out on my own. The night I packed my things, it felt like the world had closed in on me. I didn't have much. A few clothes, a couple of baby items I had bought in preparation, and a small savings account I had managed to build up working part-time. But none of that seemed enough when I was facing the reality of what I had to do. The worst part wasn't just the physical exhaustion of carrying a baby at this stage, or even the fact that I was now homeless in a way. The worst part was the betrayal I felt from the two people who should have had my back, my parents. I kept thinking about the way they looked at me as though I were the one who had messed up their plans for me, as though my pregnancy was a reflection of my failure instead of a gift that they should have embraced. But in that moment, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep dwelling on what had happened. I couldn't change their minds, and I couldn't go back to the house I had just left. What I could do, though, was take charge of my future. I was determined to make sure my baby had a better life than I had been given, even if I had to do it all alone. The first thing I did was find a place to stay. I reached out to a few friends I had stayed in touch with over the years, asking if they knew of any cheap rooms for rent or if they had any advice on where to look. It wasn't easy, but one of my friends from college offered to let me stay with her for a few weeks while I got on my feet. She had a spare bedroom, and though I didn't want to impose, I had no other option. I packed up the rest of my belongings and left the only home I had ever known. The drive to my friend's place was quiet, except for the occasional sob that I couldn't hold back. I was 8 months pregnant, homeless, and brokenhearted. It wasn't how I had envisioned this time in my life. But as the car passed familiar streetlights and the world seemed to blur around me, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just a girl who had been kicked out. I was a mother now. And I would do whatever it took to protect my child and build a better life. When I arrived at my friend's house, she welcomed me with open arms, no judgment, no questions asked. "You're always welcome here, Mia," she said, her smile genuine and warm. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I realized I had people in my life who loved me, even if my family had abandoned me. For the next few weeks, I spent my time organizing my life, trying to adjust to my new reality. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I couldn't afford to stop moving forward. I started applying for every job I could find, even if it was just part-time or minimum wage. The thought of not having enough to provide for my baby terrified me, but I was determined to do whatever it took. I also started attending prenatal classes at a local clinic. Even though I had no family support, I wasn't alone in this. The other women in the class were so supportive. They gave me advice, shared their own experiences, and reassured me that everything would be okay. Slowly, I began to feel stronger, like I wasn't facing this all alone. But even as I focused on the future, there was still a lingering sadness in my heart. My parents' rejection weighed heavily on me. I kept wondering why they couldn't see that this wasn't a mistake or a burden. I was still their daughter, and this baby was still their grandchild. Why couldn't they accept that? But no matter how much I wished things could be different, I realized that I had to stop waiting for their approval. I was the only one who could make things right for myself and my child. The moment of clarity came when I walked out of the prenatal class, feeling stronger than ever. I had done it. I had started this journey alone, but I didn't have to end it that way. The community I had built, my friends, the people in my life who cared for me, was my new family. I didn't need approval from people who had abandoned me. I needed to be the kind of mother my baby deserved, and I was going to be just that. In the following weeks, I started to build up my savings, getting small jobs that helped me prepare for the arrival of my baby. Every day, I felt myself growing stronger, both physically and emotionally. I was scared, yes, but I was also determined. And soon enough, I would have everything I needed to give my baby the best life possible. The weeks seemed to pass in a blur as I adjusted to my new life. I had a routine now, working part-time, attending prenatal classes, and preparing for the arrival of my baby. I was more tired than I had ever been in my life. But it wasn't a tiredness that made me feel weak. It was a tiredness that fueled me, because I knew that each day brought me one step closer to the future I wanted for my child. But as my due date approached, I started to feel the pressure of doing it all alone. Sure, I had a small circle of friends who supported me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have more. I should have my parents. I should have the family I had always imagined for myself, especially at this point in my life. But instead, I had their rejection. I was determined, though. I wasn't going to let that stop me. No matter how hard it was, I knew that I had to keep going. I was building a new life, and I wasn't going to let the past define me. The hardest part was when I would see other families, mothers with their partners, parents who seemed so happy and secure. I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. How had they gotten it so easy? Why couldn't I have that? But even in those moments of doubt, I reminded myself that it didn't matter. I wasn't going to waste time wishing for something I couldn't have. What mattered was what I could do for myself and my baby. Then, just a few days before my due date, something unexpected happened. It was late at night, and I was lying in bed, trying to get some rest before the baby came. The past few months had been overwhelming, and I hadn't slept well in weeks. Just as I was starting to drift off, my phone buzzed. I picked it up to see a message from my mom. My heart skipped a beat. It had been weeks since I'd heard from her. The last time we spoke, she had told me I was no longer welcome in her home. She had cut me out of her life completely. And yet, here she was, reaching out again. I opened the message, unsure of what to expect. "I'm sorry, Mia," it said. "I've had some time to think, and I know I've hurt you. I've been wrong. I want to help. I want to be there for you and the baby." I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. It didn't feel real. My mother had kicked me out at one of the most vulnerable times in my life, and now she was apologizing? Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that everything could go back to the way it was before. But the other part of me, the part that had grown strong during this journey, was wary. I had spent months building a life without her. Could I really let her back in? I sat with the message for a long time, trying to decide what to do. I had worked so hard to get where I was, to make sure my baby and I were going to be okay, and I didn't want to let anything disrupt that. But deep down, I knew I had to at least give her a chance to make things right. The next morning, I called her. "Mom?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Mia," she answered, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry for everything I've done. I've been thinking about you every day, and I can't stop feeling guilty for how I treated you. You didn't deserve it." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I don't know what to say, Mom. You kicked me out. I don't know if I can just forget that." "I know," she said, her voice filled with regret. "And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to be there for you now. I want to be a part of your life again. I want to help you with the baby. I could feel the walls I had built around myself start to crumble. It wasn't easy, but I had to admit that I missed my mom. I missed the relationship we had. And even though I had gotten this far on my own, I realized that I could still allow her to be a part of my life again, on my own terms. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Mom," I said slowly, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where we can go from here." It was a small step, but it felt like a big one. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, but I knew that I had the strength to face it. I had come this far alone, but maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to do everything alone forever. In the following days, my mom kept her word. She helped me prepare for the baby's arrival, even offering to help with some of the baby supplies I couldn't afford. She apologized for everything that had happened and promised she would do better. And while I still had some reservations, I couldn't deny that having her support meant the world to me. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl just a few days later. Holding her in my arms, I knew that everything I had gone through was worth it. I had fought for my child, fought for a better life, and now I was going to raise her with everything I had: strength, resilience, and love. The day I brought my daughter into the world was nothing short of overwhelming. The birth wasn't easy. In fact, it was the most physically exhausting experience of my life. But the moment I held my baby in my arms, all the pain, all the fear, and all the struggles seemed to fade away. I was a mother, and despite everything I had been through, I knew this was where I was meant to be. In the weeks that followed, I focused entirely on my daughter. She became my world, my reason for waking up every day and pushing through the exhaustion. But even though I was filled with love and joy for her, the emotional weight of the past didn't disappear. My parents were trying to make amends, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. I couldn't forget how they had kicked me out when I was at my most vulnerable, how they had abandoned me at the very moment when I needed them the most. It wasn't easy for me to forgive, but I knew I had to let go of some of that anger if I wanted to move forward. My baby needed me, and I needed to be strong for her, not just for myself. So I took baby steps with my mom. Slowly, we started rebuilding our relationship, but it was on my terms. I wasn't going to allow myself to fall back into the old patterns of dependency. I had learned to stand on my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice that I was starting to feel more like myself again. I had found a part-time job as a cashier at a local store. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I wasn't making a lot of money, but it was mine. I had worked for it. And that sense of independence was the one thing that kept me going. I wasn't relying on anyone but myself, and that made me proud. But even though things were looking up, there were still moments of doubt. I couldn't help but wonder if I was doing enough for my daughter. Was I giving her the life she deserved? Was I doing everything in my power to provide for her? The financial strain was real, and sometimes it felt like there was no end in sight. I would often stay up late at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to make it through the next month. One day, while I was at work, I got a call from my mom. She told me she had been saving some money and wanted to help. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't want to rely on her, especially after everything that had happened. But I knew I couldn't keep pushing myself to the brink of exhaustion. I had to accept that sometimes asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. I agreed to meet her the next day. She came to my apartment with a bag of groceries and a check for the baby's expenses. As I took the check, I could feel the tension between us. I didn't want to admit it, but I needed this. I needed her help, even if it was hard to accept. She didn't say much, just that she was proud of me and that she was here to help however she could. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like a turning point. My mother, the woman who had kicked me out, was finally showing me the support I had longed for. I knew I still had a long way to go in rebuilding our relationship, but it was a start. I wasn't going to rush it, but I was willing to take it one step at a time. As I looked at my daughter, asleep in her crib, I knew I was doing the right thing. I was learning how to balance my independence with accepting the love and support that was offered to me. I wasn't perfect, but I was doing my best, and that was all I could ask for. It was then that I realized something important. True strength isn't about doing everything on your own. It's about knowing when to stand up for yourself and when to lean on others without feeling guilty. I had learned that the hard way, but it was a lesson I would carry with me forever. I knew that no matter what the future held, I had everything I needed to face it. I had my daughter, my independence, and a new understanding of what it meant to be strong. And with that strength, there was nothing I couldn't overcome. As the months went by, I started to settle into my new life with my daughter. Things weren't perfect, and they probably never would be, but I had learned to accept that. What mattered most was that I was doing everything I could to build a future for her. I had taken the worst situation, being kicked out of my home at 8 months pregnant, and I had turned it into something I could be proud of. I had fought back when I was at my lowest, and I was still standing. The strain of being a single mom and working long hours at the store was beginning to take its toll, but I refused to let it break me. Every morning, I would get up early, make breakfast, and get my daughter ready for the day. Then I'd drop her off with a friend who had graciously offered to help watch her while I worked. By the time I came home in the evening, I was exhausted. But looking into her big brown eyes, seeing her smile, made it all worth it. The days were long, and the nights were even longer, filled with late-night feedings and rocking her to sleep. But with every moment, I felt the weight of responsibility and love in my chest. I knew that I had to keep going, not just for me, but for her. I was her mother, and she was counting on me. I wasn't going to fail her. Then, one day, I got a call that would change everything. It was from my mom. After months of silence, she reached out again. I had been unsure of how to proceed with our relationship. While I had begun to accept her help in small doses, I still wasn't ready to fully trust her. The pain of being abandoned when I needed her most had left scars, and I wasn't sure how much I could forgive. But I had to admit, the past few months had been a constant tug of war within me. Part of me still longed for the bond we had once shared, and the other part of me was terrified of being hurt again. When I picked up the phone, my heart raced. "Mia," my mom said softly, "I know I've made mistakes. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what I did, about how I treated you. I was wrong." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, but I didn't know what to say. The silence between us felt heavy, like there were so many things left unsaid, so many things that needed to be resolved. But in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need her approval to move forward in my life, but it would be nice to heal this part of my heart that had been broken. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you, Mom," I said quietly, my voice trembling. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to give this a chance. For me and for my baby. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost feel her relief. I understand, she said softly. I'll be here whenever you're ready, Mia. I don't expect anything from you, but I want to be a part of your life again, if you'll let me. That conversation marked the beginning of the healing process between us. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't easy, but over time, my mom and I started talking more and more. Slowly, she began to visit, offering her help with the baby, offering her support when I needed it most. We didn't rush back into a perfect relationship, but we didn't need to. We were building something new, something different, something built on mutual respect and understanding. I knew that I would never forget the pain she caused me by kicking me out when I was at my most vulnerable. But I also realized that I didn't have to carry that pain with me forever. I had been through the hardest part. Now I was rebuilding not just my life, but my relationships, starting with the one that mattered most. As I watched my daughter grow, I began to understand what true strength was. It wasn't about never falling down or never being hurt. It was about getting back up, no matter how many times life knocked you down. It was about forgiving, not because the other person deserved it, but because you deserved peace. It was about learning to love again, not just others, but yourself. Over the next few months, things started to come together. My job at the store became more stable, and I was able to save up enough money to move into a small apartment of my own. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and that meant everything. Every day I took small steps forward, building a future for my daughter and me, step by step, brick by brick. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew that I was capable of facing whatever came my way. As I held my daughter that night, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I realized just how far I had come. I was no longer the scared, vulnerable girl who had been kicked out 8 months pregnant. I was a mother now, strong, resilient, and ready for whatever the future held. And most importantly, I knew that no matter what happened, I would always fight for her, for us. As I looked out the window of my new apartment, a sense of accomplishment washed over me. It had taken months of uncertainty, loneliness, and overwhelming challenges, but I had made it. I had built a life for my daughter and me from the ground up. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I had gone from being kicked out at 8 months pregnant to standing on my own 2 feet, creating the future I had dreamed of, despite the odds stacked against me. I still couldn't shake the memory of that moment when my parents kicked me out. The pain, the betrayal, it was something I had carried with me for so long. But it wasn't just their rejection that had hurt. It was the feeling of being abandoned at a time when I needed them most. I had spent years trying to live up to their expectations, trying to prove that I was worthy of their love and approval. And in the end, they had shown me that they weren't willing to support me when I needed it most. I couldn't forget that, and I didn't think I ever would. But I also realized something important over the past few months. Holding on to that pain wasn't helping me or my baby. I had learned to forgive, not because my parents deserved it, but because I needed peace. It was a long, difficult journey. But the more I forgave, the more I was able to let go of the anger that had consumed me. I wasn't just forgiving my parents. I was forgiving myself. I had spent so long blaming myself for everything that had happened, for the situation I found myself in. But in truth, None of it was my fault. I had done my best, and I needed to accept that. My mom's attempts to make amends had started slowly but surely. After our phone conversation, we began talking more often. At first, the conversations were awkward. We didn't know how to navigate the changes in our relationship. There were moments when I felt the walls between us still stood strong, but I could sense that she was trying. She wasn't the same woman who had kicked me out. The guilt and regret in her voice were genuine. Slowly, she started to show up more, bringing groceries, offering to watch my daughter while I went to work. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it was enough for me to begin to trust her again, even if it wasn't all the way. There were still moments when I felt the old anger bubbling up inside me. I wasn't fully healed, and I knew I still had a lot of work to do, but I was willing to take it one day at a time, and I wasn't going to rush myself. I had learned that true healing doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and it takes effort. But the first step was acknowledging that I deserved better, that I deserved to be treated with respect and love, no matter what mistakes I had made in the past. During this period of reconciliation with my mom, I began to notice how much stronger I had become. I was no longer the scared young woman who had been rejected by her parents. I was a mother now, a woman who had fought for her child and herself. I had learned to stand up for what I needed, even when it meant standing alone. I had learned that I didn't need anyone's approval to prove my worth. I had learned that my daughter and I were enough, just as we were. The next few months were filled with small victories. I found a second part-time job working from home, which allowed me to spend more time with my daughter while still bringing in enough money to cover our bills. Slowly, my financial situation started to improve. I was able to move out of the small apartment I was renting with my friend and find a place of our own. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was a step up from where we had been, and it felt like a fresh start. I also started to build a support network of other single mothers in my community. I had always felt isolated, but now I was connecting with women who understood exactly what I was going through. We shared advice, resources, and stories of resilience. We laughed together, cried together, and supported each other in ways I never thought possible. I realized that while I didn't have the family I had once hoped for, I had found a new kind of family, one built on mutual understanding, shared experiences, and love. Even though things were starting to come together, I knew I still had a long road ahead. My daughter was growing, and as she did, so did my responsibilities. I couldn't afford to be complacent. I had to keep pushing, keep working, and keep fighting for the life I wanted for her. But I had found something invaluable in the process, a deep well of inner strength that I never knew I had. I had fought back when I was at my lowest, and now I was building a life that was stable, secure, and full of love. One evening, after my daughter had fallen asleep, I sat on the couch and reflected on everything that had happened. I thought about the rejection, the pain, the loneliness. I thought about how far I had come and how much I had grown. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. I wasn't just a mother now. I was a woman who had learned to navigate the most difficult parts of life with grace and resilience. It was then that I realized the most important lesson I had learned over the past few months. You are stronger than you think. And even in the face of the most difficult trials, you have the power to rise above them. I had been kicked out of my home, alone and pregnant. But I had fought back, and I had won. I had created a future for myself and my daughter, and nothing, no one, could take that away from me. In that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would never stop fighting for my daughter, for my future, and for the strength I knew I had inside me. And no matter what came next, I knew I was ready. The days continued to pass, each one bringing its own set of challenges and triumphs. I had grown used to the daily grind, the endless cycle of work, childcare, and making sure that every piece of my life stayed in balance. I had learned to embrace my new reality. I wasn't the girl I once was, the one who relied on her parents, who constantly tried to fit into an ideal mold. I had shed those layers, just like the skin of an old snake. And what remained was someone stronger, someone who had found her voice and would never again let anyone silence her. But still, there were moments when the weight of everything seemed too much. My daughter was growing, and I could see how quickly the world was changing around her. Sometimes, when she would smile up at me, her small hands reaching for me, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of future I was giving her. I wanted to give her everything I hadn't had: a stable home, the love of a family, and most of all, a sense of security. I wanted to protect her from the world's cruelty, from the mistakes I had made, and from the pain that sometimes seemed so inevitable. I had learned to rely on my instincts, to trust my own decisions. But deep down, I was scared. I was scared that one day I would mess up, that I wouldn't be able to provide for her in the way she deserved. I was scared that I wouldn't be able to give her the life I had dreamed of for her. But as the months went on, those fears began to dissipate. I realized that perfection was an illusion, and all I could give her was my best. And in that, I found peace. She didn't need perfection. She needed love. She needed a mother who would stand by her, protect her, and fight for her, no matter what. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was the best mother I could be, and that was enough. Then, one day, an unexpected opportunity came knocking.